and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Siobhan Holt, news editor at PRWeek and your host for today. I'm joined by UK editor John Harrington. Hi, John.
Hi, Siobhan.
Our guest today is Andrew Roache, UK and Ireland comms boss at Mondelēz International, one of the world's largest snack companies. Mondelēz is home to well-known food brands such as Oreo and Toblerone, and iconic chocolate company Cadbury, which incidentally marks its 200th anniversary this year. As External Affairs lead for the UK and Ireland, he's responsible for comms and advocacy, focusing on managing reputation, sustainability and regulation. Andrew joined Mondelēz in 2022 after 9 years at Carlsberg. He's previously held comms roles at pub giant Mitchells Butlers and worked agency side at Red Consultancy and McCann. Thank you for joining us today, Andrew. Sorry for the long introduction there.
Yeah, no problem. Great to be on.
Okay, so on today's episode, given in-house comms chiefs are becoming more senior and more pivotal in the success of big businesses, we wanted to ask you, as an influential comms boss, how your role is changing and what you want to see from your PR agency. So let's kick off then. Could you begin by explaining how your comms role has evolved during your career, and has the relationship between brands and agencies changed during that time, do you think?
I think to a degree. So I look after corporate communications and public affairs in the UK and Ireland for Mondelēz International. I feel quite lucky that I started off agency side. So in those kind of formative years, 4 or 5 years, at Red and at McCann, which gave me a real grounding in PR and different clients, working with different people, and just learning, so much, through that time. And then I was able to take that more, largely my career has been in-house then, and some of the companies you've already mentioned. So I think, through that, I've been able to experience all the different facets, investor relations, sustainability, public affairs, all of the above. I think it's fairly consistent, in terms of how I've always worked with agencies. I think ultimately what you're looking for is, really good, smart people, some real sector experience and knowledge. So, they need to come with that. And then above all, I think just kind of, real kind of razor sharp execution, in everything they do. I know it's really easy to say that, but, sometimes the kind of the fundamentals and the basics are what you really, really need, particularly during busy times. So I'd like to think, through the experience that I've got on both sides of the fence, I'm able to take that into, how I work with agencies and what I'm looking for them to do.
Great. No, thank you for that. And is it all right to put a bit more sort of meat on the bones, really, about what your sort of agency setup is and why you have it that way? I know you're not necessarily keen to sort of, pick out individual agencies, and obviously the company works with a huge number, but sort of what have you kind of got the agencies doing across the business, and why is it sort of structured that way, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the role for about 1.5 years. So, the approach is one, I've inherited, but actually I think works really, really well. So we call it CGA, from a corporate and government affairs perspective, I work with 2 agencies very closely day to day, as does the team. One of those looks after corporate communications, some, projects along those lines, and then a separate one that looks after public affairs. And that's because our approach is very much across the 2 areas. We said it at the start, managing reputation and advocacy work, public affairs as well. We're a relatively small team for the UK and Ireland. I would say, 4 people in total, but we are part of a much larger Northern European team as well. So the approach really does work for us. What we try to do is manage as much as we can in-house. So alongside myself and the team, we try to have really good close relationships with the media and the ones that we've worked with for a long time there, manage those directly ourselves. We also manage our own in-house press office as well from a Mondelēz perspective. So the 2 agencies that we're working with very closely are doing a lot more of the more proactive work, supporting us, whether it's messaging, whether it's projects, whether it's something like Cadbury 200, which I'm sure we'll come on to. And then similarly, from a public affairs perspective, you can imagine there's a lot going on in terms of policy at the moment in the UK and Ireland, HFSS, etc. So we really work with that agency to make sure that we're monitoring, what's happening, making sure that we're engaging in the right debates and the right forums, and making sure that we're as proactive as we can, in the work that we do. So that structure, I think, in trying to own as much as we can in-house, but then using the agencies to really support us, works particularly well. I think more broadly than that, I think we are fortunate in how we're resourced. We also have some support for some of our local community work. So one of the schemes that we run is called Health for Life. It's about, educating people in schools and in the community about healthy eating and how they can look to, incorporate that within their daily lives. So we do use a local agency for some of that work there that we do, and we're a big, Midlands employer, so it makes sense for us to have that, specialist support locally as well. And then in terms of brands, you name some of the brands at the start. We do have a large number of brands, very large, programs of activity. And therefore, the brands also have their own agencies that tend to manage a lot of campaigns, brand press office, product launches, day to day as well. So very much our brand team will manage those. But as a corporate and government affairs team, given we have that overarching role of managing reputation, we obviously work with them very, very closely on that and have really close relationships as well.
Fantastic.
And are you very procurement led then as an organisation? Do you have to procure your marketing and comms quite carefully with all this? Because that's quite a large scope, I would say.
Yes, I mean, as I say, in the sort of year and a half that I've been in role, I've not run any pitches, but I think it's safe to say, any large organisation like ours would definitely be, fairly procurement led. But I think very much, working in partnership and using their expertise when we need it. In my previous role at Carlsberg, I did run a large pitch there where we combined some of the Carlsberg brand work and our corporate work as well, and we ran quite a large pitch process. And actually, I found procurement to be a really valuable partner. I know agencies maybe not always the biggest fans, and I get that, there can be some very detailed paperwork and processes to follow. But actually, I think the important thing is that procurement makes sure it's if you go into a pitch process, it's a really level playing field. Everyone's working to the same information, the same timings, the same processes, the same opportunities to engage with the pitch team. And actually, I found that they can find some areas that maybe, even an agency hadn't thought to kind of mention. Very, very small example, in a previous role, we didn't have office space in London, but actually we were down there a lot. So actually being able to work inside the agency from time to time, and then being open to that, maybe not for a formal meeting, but just for, to be there and to some of those kind of water cooler kind of chats worked really well. Now, was the pitch based on that? Of course not, but it was like a little added value that we were able to find. So I think, the short answer is I do think that procurement plays a really important role in that process.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The amount of sort of demonisation of procurement that we get from agencies, and I expect some of them have probably got a fair point in many ways, but at the same time, there are clearly advantages, and people probably recognise that too. So yeah, no, it's really interesting.
Totally. And I think, I have pitched at an agency before, and I've obviously ran pitch processes. So I get it. I'm certainly not suggesting it's a walk in the park, but I think it's almost time well spent, in order to get the most out of the whole process, because they are time consuming, resource intensive, certainly for agencies as well. So I do think there's a really important role that they play.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to, you mentioned HFSS regulations, that's the high in fat, salt or sugar sort of product regulations. There's obviously a big public affairs lobbying effort around that at the moment, and as part of your role you oversee corporate governance affairs, and obviously that's a big part of it. What would you say are the challenges you face with that debate, and how does kind of agency support help there?
Yeah, I mean, we're well down the road, in terms of England, in terms of HFSS. So a lot of it is already come into force, and there's more to follow. And essentially, it's looking at how, for products that meet the category, it's how they are able to, market and promote and position themselves. So we've been managing that for a number of years, and part of the role really is to help prepare the organisation. So once we know a policy is coming in and that debate's been had and it's been shaped, then ultimately our role then is to help lead the company through it to make sure that we're able to continue to do what we do in line with the policy. But at the same time, we obviously work across the UK and Ireland, so there are different things happening at different times. There are different parts of the policy. So a lot of what we're trying to advocate for is, an alignment. So specifically for HFSS, slightly different schemes proposed, in terms of Scotland and in Wales. And yet we're obviously a UK and I manufacturer. We manufacture and then we work with customers all across those countries. So, part of the work that we will do is trying to seek that alignment to make sure that, we are able to implement it, as best we can. ahead of that, it's always making sure that things are evidence-based, that the data supports it, that it will have the desired intention. So it's a huge part of the work that we do. It's really important, given it can have an impact on the business. But ultimately, the common goal is often there. And, we are looking to make sure that we have a variety of products that meet the full spectrum, from those that, are, healthier well-being choices through to slightly more indulgent products as well. So that's what we're here to do. In terms of how our agency supports us, I mean, these things run, as you'll know, over many, many years. So, we're obviously looking, a lot of plates are spinning, in our world, in-house communications and corporate affairs. So actually having an agency that is able to really support us on tracking, the latest developments, the conversations, questions in the house, all of that is really important. And then right through to how we then look to engage, and we will be quite proactive. Many people from a political side will come to Bourneville to see, manufacturing in action, to see how we may reformulate, some of our products and the complexity involved in that. Reformulating a chocolate bar is really, really tricky. It takes a lot of time, and investment to do that. So we are able to sort of showcase some of that work. So we'll work with our agency, on some of the more proactive engagement opportunities that enable us to have those conversations and to showcase, either some of the complexity or some of the opportunities.
Is it harder at the moment with the current political situation as it is, where there potentially could be a different government? I'm just wondering how that then changes your approach when it comes to the comms and lobbying and things.
I don't know that it's more difficult. I guess, organisations are always looking for stability, in terms of approach and in terms of policies. So, it just means that we're having to make sure that, we have those relationships. We know the people in the key roles, and we know what may be coming down the line, in terms of manifestos and agendas and things like that. So it's going to be a busy year. Anyone working in comms and corporate affairs will tell you that. We are anticipating the general election later in the year, so it just means there's more to do on top of the day job, but it's it's all really valuable work.
Absolutely. So I'm going to make you move on to pitching now, because I know that some of our listeners are going to be really keen about that. So what advice would you give to agencies pitching for work?
Oh, if they want my advice, I can give some reflections. I think, I mean, I think certainly from my perspective, of course I read PRWeek. I help with judging some of the awards, so I like to kind of keep an interest on what's going on, who's doing good work, and things like that. So, I do get approaches from time to time. Often the timing is out or whatever. So I just think the best piece of advice, and probably the obvious one, is agencies just doing incredible work and standing out, and if they can, winning awards is always a really good approach. I know it's not easy, but that's the one thing that I'm always looking out for, and that's why I do sort of invest time in judging awards and things like that. I think other than that, when it comes to actual pitch processes, I mentioned that the role of procurement, can play. I would like to think, a good in-house comms operator who's, maybe leading the pitch process will have a really tight brief. They will make sure that the right people, on the inside of the organization who will make the decision, and that can be more than one often, are going to be in the room for all of the sessions. And again, that goes back to that consistency and that aligned approach to make sure everyone is having, the same opportunities to engage. So that's probably what I think, the brand or the company needs to bring to the table. I think from an agency perspective, then it's very much down to them and their kind of interpretation of the brief, them using the opportunities that are often built in. And, I guess best practice is there will be time to ask questions, maybe a tissue session or a chemistry session, as well as then the actual pitch meetings themselves. So I think making the best opportunity of those where they're available is really important. That's where I think it's worked best. And then I think it goes back to, the fundamentals on, the kind of the approach to the brief, the work that they present, the team that they bring in. And it's such a cliche, but, having the people that will work on the account from my perspective, is key. Of course, it's great to meet the more, some of the more senior operators that will be in and around, and leading the agency. And that's really important too. But, I do think as a brand, or as someone leading the process, you want that opportunity to kind of get to know the team, get to know the work, have those conversations. So I see it as quite collaborative, and I think that might be because I have worked, agency side as well. I can't speak for others, and people may run different processes, but seeing it from both sides, I think, is really helpful. But yeah, I don't think there's any magic to it, and agencies will know it far better than me. But I think those are some of the areas that I would look to leverage where I could.
And when it comes to bringing ideas, are you looking for strategy or more creative ideas when they're pitching? What would you prefer?
I think it is both. It really does depend on what the brief is. I think, it has to be the strategy because, that is really, that shows the thinking, that shows that knowledge, of an industry or of a company or a brand. So having all of that and sort of outlining why they're proposing the work, what impact they think it will have, and the direction of travel is really, really important. I think the creativity part, again, that is then essential as well. That's kind of really showing how they'll utilize that strategy and really land it, from a communications and a PR approach as well. And I think that is often where agencies can really stand out. I think when they have the both, when they've got that strategic thinking as well as the creative ideas, and then also importantly for me is that execution. I really like the detail, maybe not at a pitch level, but once we're getting into the actual work, I really like knowing the nuts and bolts, just so I have that confidence that if we go down this route and we want to deliver this work, kind of know how it's all going to come together, and I know what the asks of me are, I know what the asks of the team are, and I also know how the agency will work with us. So again, it goes back to quite a collaborative way is how I like to work personally. But yeah, strategy, creative thinking, execution are the things that I would be looking to see in a pitch response.
Side point, but you must have the best snacks at the pitch meetings. Presumably you get comments on this, or
I'm certainly not. I'm not short of snacks.
Good.
I can't even visit my parents now without my dad asking me if I've been to the Cadbury shop. Before, I've been known to turn back on a journey if I don't have some sweets for him. But as I said earlier, I haven't ran a pitch process in my sort of year and a half at Mondelēz. We have a really established corporate agency, and I think the public affairs agency had been in for maybe a year just before I joined. So I would much rather invest the time in getting the most out of those relationships and that work, and almost taking my time to get to know the business and the brands and the agencies than running kind of straight into any kind of a pitch process. But if and when we do, I would make sure we have a variety of snacks and sweets.
Fantastic. So the flip side to this, I guess, is what are the things you don't want to see from an agency? What in your experience have been the kind of things you've heard, you've experienced, or you sort of red flags maybe from pitch meetings that have been a real kind of turn off, I suppose?
Oh, it's a tough question. I don't know that I've had any turn offs really. I think in my experience, I think it can be quite obvious when maybe an idea is being presented that looks like it could have worked for multiple brands, or definitely a watch out would be making sure that any of the work presented is very much in response to the brief on the table and what's required. So there may be times when there's a great idea and an agency is really keen to land it, and they may run it by different brands, but I think I can spot that, if I'm honest. I think the main one, like I mentioned before, is I wouldn't wheel out, people, just because they're maybe experts if they're not then truly going to work or deliver the work on the account as well. Of course, there are times when agencies will bring in, expert knowledge and specialist knowledge as well, and that's absolutely fine. But I wouldn't want the whole kind of, a pitch response to be based around that. So I do think making sure an agency has the right people that will be working on the account at all levels, really important. And actually being really vocal in the meeting, and not leading it to one person to kind of present. I think it's great when it's, everyone is kind of, playing their role. And actually I have to say that does tend to happen. It's not, I think it's fairly common for that to happen. But I think, you just get that relationship and that kind of, understand how people are, how they work, and I think that's really important.
Sounds like you've had quite a positive experience overall when you've been talking to other agencies, whether that's formal pitches or perhaps more informal chats. And would you say you're sort of relatively upbeat about the strength of the agency world as a whole at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think to your first point, I'd like to think I've always had fairly positive experiences, and that can be even making sure that, you do pick up the phone and give the opportunity to give feedback as to why maybe an agency wasn't successful, and they may not, always like the feedback or accept it, but that's part of the role as someone leading the pitch. So that does kind of create a positive experience overall. I'm no expert, in comparison to both of you, but I do try to engage in various forums. I think there's some great agencies out there. I do like seeing some of the up and coming agencies as well, and sort of keeping an eye on what they're doing. But yeah, lots of reasons to be positive, I think, as we at the relatively start of 24.
And now a message about the latest podcast from our sister title, Media Week.
We interrupt this podcast to deliver an important message for media people from media people. We are the Media Week podcast. 4 faces in the weeds of the media world come together to provide you with a digestible summary of industry updates and media bants. Each episode, Jack from Craft, Buki from Wavemaker, Charlie from Show Heroes, and me, Harriet from Publicis, chat all things from social, out of home, programmatic, and more. Tune in to wherever you get your podcasts to hear what's hot, what's not, and our opinions on navigating the industry.
And are there any sort of skills that you're looking for when you're taking on an agency? Are there anything you sort of value from your agency workers?
I mean, you need a bit of everything, ultimately. I always kind of go back to what I said earlier. It's that kind of, that sort of smart thinking, not some of the obvious stuff. So people who do know, the brand, the company, the business, the areas of work that we work in, and are kind of constantly, kind of educating themselves on that. So they're kind of, coming in and they're up to speed really, really quickly. Fundamentals are always there. It is good writing, it's good media contacts, it's good good presentation skills. And again, those I mentioned it before, those are the fundamentals, I think, that you need, whatever agency that you are, because it's a really working in-house, and certainly for a company like ours, it's really fast paced. There's an awful lot going on, so you do need people that are kind of able to kind of work at that pace as well. So I think those are key. And of course, then it depends on the kind of the work that we're doing. So on the public affairs side of things, again, it's just making sure that you're working with people that are really up to speed on the latest, because there's a lot of change going on within the government at the moment. So and we can't always kind of stay on top of all of that. So almost that area, they're a slight extension of the team kind of coming to us and letting us know sometimes what's going on as well. So yeah, I think the fundamentals have always been there, and those are the things that I'm looking for.
And you mentioned change there. I was just wondering, we're constantly talking about AI skills at the moment, and I was just wondering whether you have been looking at that as well with your agencies, whether that sort of support is something you've been leaning on.
To a degree. I mean, it's it's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it, really, when you look at it. We actually, one of our agencies did take us through a learning session on AI and communications about a month or 2 ago, and I thought I had a decent knowledge of AI, and I have sat through a couple of different sessions when people are talking about how AI can be used, and how communicators are using it. But no, this was a really interesting session. Are we using it, in our role currently? Probably, I would probably have to be upfront and honest and say no, not necessarily. Maybe our agencies are. I couldn't tell you, but I'm certainly very interested in it. And sessions like that, I think agencies coming to us with some of the opportunities and challenges with it, and some of what's happening out there is really important. So that was the type of session that is not your bread and butter, but was certainly good to have and good to be part of.
So on new business, how does an agency get on one of your pitch lists? I suppose I appreciate you haven't pitched since you've been at Mondelēz, but what sort of advice would you give to an agency, particularly if they're a new agency that is not necessarily as well known as some of the others?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, I think, is probably the first thing to say, because there's some great agencies out there of different sizes and with different specialist areas. So I think it's not straightforward to answer that question. I think when I mentioned before, I do take a vested interest in PR agencies and what's going on in the comms world, given I've kind of worked on both sides. So I've always taken that with me and always tried to keep an eye on like I said before, who's doing good work. And I think that's a massive head start, because when it comes to whether it's a brand or whether it's the CGA team looking, I'll probably have an indication of some of the agencies that I would at least like to have an early conversation with. So that's one thing. So, entering awards like the PRWeek Awards would be one, and you didn't ask me to say that.
Thank you, though.
But that's always a good head start. I think other than that, so when I look back at previous pitches that I've led, there are some, good resources out there, in terms of CIPR, PRCA, and there are sort of schemes that you can use that will help you develop, long lists ultimately, and kind of, start to see, because there will always be agencies that, maybe you haven't kind of come across. So I think, from an agency perspective, probably engaging at some of that trade association level as well, and kind of, making sure that they're out there on the radar is really important to do. And then I think, being seen and speaking at, industry events as well, because, those are, informal opportunities to, meet people, meet brands. For me, meet agency owners and agency staff as well, and just get on the radar. I think, we are in a relationships business to a degree, and I think, being visible in some of those external forums is really valuable as well. I do get, the odd email, that will kind of be sharing credentials, and I do tend to keep them, but it's probably not front of mind when I then start, start a process. Yeah, so that's probably how I do it. And honestly, it sounds like I'm pitching every week. It's not something that is particularly common, but over the years, I guess I have run a few.
Have you ever had an email that did come in that did catch your eye and during your career that you thought, actually, that's whether it's a suggestion or that stood out?
Do you know, if I say yes, I'll probably just get a lot more emails.
Fair enough.
No, nothing stands out, to be honest. Probably less so emails, again, going back a number of years when I was at Mitchells Butlers, I do remember that there was an agency owner that, actually just picked up the phone. I sort of knew them in and around the industry. Again, they had that external visibility. So rather than it just being like an email pitch about the work that their agency do, probably was just picking up the phone, knowing them to have a conversation with at the next kind of industry forum or industry event, and then starting a bit of a conversation there. And then, in time, I think we did actually do some trade work with them as well. But again, I just think that's kind of very sensible. That's a sensible approach from them. It's kind of knowing the company that I was working for in the industry we're in, and just kind of bringing that together, ahead of then getting into a pitch process. So I don't know that there's any kind of magic answer, if I'm honest. I think it goes down to a little bit of all of the above.
Yeah, I really think the point about being visible and just sort of the fact it is a networking industry, it really can't be sort of overemphasized, really.
100%. And actually, some of the PR forums that I go to, having an agency present their work, maybe in an unrelated space, but, just getting that, 20 minutes of what the brief was, what their approach was, what the results that were achieved were. It's great, and you just remember that sort of stuff. And again, there may be an opportunity that comes out of that.
Absolutely. So, moving on, celebrating 200 years of an iconic brand like Cadbury is going to be a monumental task. It's not one I envy you. So how do you plan to do this, and how are your agencies supporting on this?
Yes, yeah, it's a big a big anniversary. Yeah, where do I where do I begin? Well, it began 200 years ago in 1824 on Ball Street in Birmingham. But I won't give you the all the history. But no, it's a really significant milestone for the brand, and I am local. I am from Birmingham, so yeah, a little bit of pride that I'm able to be a small part of that. So we are celebrating 200 years of the brand in the UK. It is very brand led. So already, you may have hopefully seen some of the work that's been delivered. So there's a new TVC, which take the shopkeeper advert from many years ago with a little girl who wants to buy her mother a bar of chocolate, but it just kind of transports it across a 200-year time period. So really impactful piece of work that launched in January. And then from a consumer perspective, there's retro Cadbury Dairy Milk chocolate bars, my favourites from the early 90s, because it probably takes me back to my school days. that are available, seven different varieties of those that people can go and buy. And then there's a really lovely out-of-home campaign around celebrating memories of Cadbury. So hopefully you may have seen that from, the grandparents with some chocolate on a plate with a knife and fork through to, people with a 99 flake in their ice cream. So very much to date, it's been very consumer focused. So lots of touch points for consumers to kind of, almost be involved in that. And there's much more to come later in the year. So obviously the brand PR agents have been really heavily involved in PRing all of that work and creating a lot of that work as well. We're obviously seeing, lots of interest to kind of, get inside the factory, although that is fairly constant. It doesn't have to be our 200 years. So we obviously have to pick and choose when we're able to, kind of get people in to sort of see the magic of the Cadbury chocolate factory, as it were. But I'm sure we'll have more of those to come in the year. I think more broadly, I mean, we've got lots planned. It is across the full year that we're looking to mark this. So we have activities and, in terms of investment in the local community. We have quite a lot planned in terms of employee engagement, and the agencies are very much leading a lot of that work. So we have 9 sites in the UK. I've obviously mentioned Bourneville quite a lot, but we have sites in Herefordshire, in North Wales, and elsewhere in Reading, etc. So we will be looking to take, that kind of Cadbury 200-year anniversary to all of the 4,000 people that we employ, across the UK. And that's a huge project, and certainly very much led by, our brand and internal comms team, but supported by the agencies to deliver that. And they'll be doing great work there. Then more from my side, from a corporate and government affairs space. I mean, I can't say too much because it's kind of, all in the planning, but we will be looking to make sure that we are able to, use the moment to share more about, about the brand, about Mondelēz, about maybe some of the things that people don't know. The fact that we employ 600 scientists, in the UK, which I don't think many people would know. Why would they? But really nice opportunity for us to just sort of slightly go under the wrapper of the bar to sort of show all the different things that are involved in the brand and in the products, and I guess that has helped it to endure for 200 years. So your question, how do we even go about doing that? I think lots of planning, lots of people involved, multiple agencies involved as well. But who wouldn't want to work on it? So it's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And so I presume then with that you've got the trade agencies involved in that as well as the Birmingham based one. So it's all different layers. Yeah.
It's all different layers. So locally, there'll be local media that will be particularly keen to sort of be in and around Bourneville, which is our kind of the historic home of Cadbury. So we'll work with them very closely. From a trade agency perspective, there's a lot planned for the brand, and that retailer engagement is really, really important. So there's lots going on in that space with them as well. The brand agencies will have been heavily involved, for the past year or so, so the various new products that have either launched or, could be launched, they'll be heavily involved there. And then obviously from a CGA perspective, the kind of some of the work that I've just mentioned we'll be looking to do, we'll be working with those agencies as well. So multiple agencies. But I have to say there's, this is not just a corporate and government affairs led activity. It's very, very brand led, and it's very much, a lot of people working on it. So that's the only way that you can deliver, that type of a project.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, given the sort of nature of Mondelēz International, obviously international, but obviously very much everywhere across the UK, how important is it for agencies to have a sort of a UK-wide sort of reach, whether that's offices in different parts of the country or perhaps freelancers in different parts of the country, or just knowledge of, what it's like, the media in different areas? How important is that, would you say, given particularly the PR industry's agency side London bias that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it plays a role. I've mentioned a number of the types of agencies that we work with. They probably are all predominantly London based. And I guess in this day and age, that can work. Either people will travel, or we can have Teams calls, or et cetera, et cetera. So, but then I think it is also good to work with a local agency, on specific briefs. So, being able to work with a local agency on some of the projects that we'll be doing as part of Cadbury 200 again, I think that adds real value. They've just got that local knowledge. They'll know the local media, they'll know the local geography, and they'll know the brand, fairly inside out. It's on their doorstep. So I think it can add real value. But I don't know that geography has to be a barrier. I think, everyone works pretty smartly nowadays. And, historically, a lot of PR agency have been, had their headquarters in London, and I can be there in, an hour and 20 minutes. So, not a problem. I've worked for a regional PR agency, back in the day, and they do great work. They've got great clients. So, they can be very proud of the work that they do as well. So I think it very much depends on the project as to who you work with. But there's definitely a role that they can play.
Thank you to Andrew for today. That was really insightful conversation, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to the podcast. Do check out PRWeek.com for all the latest news and all our great events too that are coming up in 2024. I'm also going to quickly promote 2 fantastic award schemes, 30 Under 30, which is our annual search for the young stars of UK PR, and the PR Week Global Awards, which recognise the best campaigns, agencies, in-house teams and individuals in comms from across the globe. Enter both now. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then we'd love it if you'd leave a review, please, wherever you access PR Week's Beyond the Noise podcast. This podcast goes live every 2 weeks, but look out for our shorter news-based podcast, Noise in Brief, which comes out next week. That's all for today. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.